My guest today is Leonard Perlmutter, who is the founder of the American Meditation Institute, editor of Transformation, the Journal of Yoga Science as Mind Body Medicine, originator of National Conscious Month, and his first book, The Heart and Science of Yoga, won 6 National Book Awards. A direct disciple of Swami Rama of the Himalayas, Leonard has taught at the MD Anderson Cancer Center, Kaiser Permanente, the New York Times Yoga Forum, U.S. Military Academy at West Point, and his foundation course is certified by the American Medical Association. In today's episode, Leonard and I will speak about his latest bestseller, Your Conscious, the key to unlock wisdom and creativity and solve all of life's challenges. Welcome to Lifeology.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you very much, James.
Oh, it is my pleasure as well. My listeners may not remember this, but probably about 3 years ago when I first started on radio, you were an amazing guest on my show today, or on my show. And so when your publisher sent me information, I was like, oh my gosh, of course I want you back. So thank you once again for gracing us with your wisdom today. And I know you have so much to teach us.
Well, we all have things to learn from each other.
Yes, we certainly do. How did you become the disciple of this amazing person in the Himalayas? What was his name? Swami Rama. How did you become his disciple? I
became his disciple because he asked me to be his disciple. Mm-hmm. He was my teacher, but I had never met him for 13 years. Oh, wow. I read his books, and what I enjoyed so much about the books was that it was very reminiscent of my experience as a child in Scouts. When I was a kid growing up in grade school and into high school, I was both a Cub Scout and then I was a Boy Scout. And it was very practical learning. So when I began reading the books by Swami Rama, he sort of seemed like my scoutmaster.
Oh, that's neat.
And it was very practical advice. And when I was a child, I spoke to my scoutmaster because I had a question. Mm-hmm. And the question had to do with the motto of Scouts. I don't know if you remember, but the motto of Scouting was be prepared. So I asked my scoutmaster when I was a little kid, be prepared for what? And he looked at me with a quizzical look in his eye, and he said, how would I know? And that's the truth, you know?
That's a good one.
It's all a minute.
That is hysterical. You know, and I appreciate you saying that because there's one person in particular who I've never met, and one day I will. But I read this person's books and I hear this person's messages as well. And in fact, I was listening to today at the gym, and it really impacts me, and it does so much for me, and it helps me just really stay focused. So I'm sure there's just my listeners and viewers have someone like that. Obviously, Leonard is one of these amazing people as well that you can listen to or to read his books, and you'll get that information. So it's so interesting how life always gives us teachers, always gives us things to learn. And so a teacher doesn't necessarily have to mean it's, the most astute person you ever met. It can be the innocence of a child, the lovingness of acceptance of a dog as they will say hi to everybody. I mean, whatever it might be, there's always a lesson. And to me, that's one of the biggest things is in every situation I'm in, quote, healthy or unhealthy, I always ask myself, what am I learning about myself right now? Sometimes there's a lot of joy that comes with it. And sometimes there's a lot of chagrin. As I'm like, oh, I get to learn this lesson again. And so that's really something I always do in my own life. And I'm sure with you as well. So, but I wanted to transition. Go ahead, please. Just
parenthetically, there's a wonderful word that folks should be aware of. And that's eucatastrophe.
Yes.
Yes. And the prefix EU comes from the Greek, which means good. So when it's coupled with catastrophe, it's a good kind of catastrophe. Might it cause pain? Yes. Might it be unacceptable for the ego? Yes. However, somewhere in that relationship, there is a gift waiting for us.
Yes. That's interesting. Yes, I knew that. I knew the Greek prefix of it, the U part, but I've never heard it used in the aspect of the eucatastrophe. I like that. Thank you for teaching me. That's something really that encompasses the lesson. The journey, the struggle, the blessing and the burden is always there. But I like that word. It's very concise. I appreciate that. When we were talking in the pre-call, I really enjoy your message, your brand, if you will, to use modern words, but because it says so much. You look at the whole aspect of a person, the spirit, mind, and body, the id, ego, superego, whatever you want to call it, or whatever people call it. But you do the same thing that I do in a lot of ways when it comes to why do we do what we do, and why do we continue to do what we do? And let's find a healthier, more concise, more specific intention of living life. I think so many times we get lost in the periphery, or there's so much that happens in the world that we just forget that life doesn't have to be so complicated. Just slow everything down. And just even listen to you speak, you're very methodical, very thoughtful in what you say, and very intentional. And I think just even you modeling this is great. But I really appreciate all that you continue to do and how you help people really understand the consciousness, the non-conscious mind, the unconscious mind, or whatever people call it, to help them really understand what's a motivation, or what's a focus, or what's the reason why I'm being, or why I'm doing this. I wanted to look at your book here. And so my listeners can't see this, but it'll be on my website. So this book here is Your Consciousness. You're Conscious, the keys to unlock limitless wisdom and creativity and solve all of life's challenges. What happened for you that said, I need to write this? What was the motivation for this book to be written?
Well, I think that the motivation was COVID. I was in quarantine since March of 2020.
Sure. Yes.
And I missed my students who came for live classes and for counseling. And I said to myself, well, why am I here? Why am I in this quarantine? How can I still be of service? Because service is the bottom line for me in every relationship. Yes. And so I said, is there anything that I can gift my students and the world that will help them deal with this very, very challenging karma, these circumstances that are coming to us? Because it spills over into so many different aspects of life. Yeah. And what I came up with was Your Conscience, so that everybody will begin to listen to the advice of Jiminy Cricket.
Yes,
Walt
I love
Disney from the 1950s, 1930s, to let your conscience be your guide.
Yes.
And then even this challenging COVID situation, we can walk through it and benefit others.
Yes. And I appreciate that. What I always tell a lot of I still consult with people, and what I always tell people is when life happens, life is going to be different. And so every event, if it seems more challenging, think of it like a season. So let's say if people who live up north, when a blizzard happens, you don't wear the same clothes you wear during the summer. You wear something different. And so the understanding of when life throws something at you or something happens, you don't do the same things that you did when life was going well, like, quote, easy. And so the understanding of how to use your conscience, how to use these opportunities to say, okay, well, if I don't want to, quote, get too cold, I have to do something different. I have to work harder. I have to do something to help myself. And so sometimes that's a time of isolation. Literal isolation is when it comes to meditation, to prayer, to spirituality. And other times it's something where you have to be out in public or do different things. And so the recognition that when life throws something at you, what worked before may not always work. It might, but sometimes you have to do more. And so when you recognize what else can I do, then that gives you the grace you need in that moment to be able to understand that, yes, I'm going to try something new. And that's once again how self-development happens, is because now you recognize this didn't work before, something else works. And so I can't live off of yesterday's strength. I have to do something new today. With the conscious mind, I was reading here that you talk about the mind itself. And you talk about 4 different aspects of the mind. Can you walk us through what those 4 aspects are, or functions rather?
Sure. The first that we're very, very familiar with is the ego, but it's not the Western psychological definition of the ego being puffed up and full of oneself. Ego is anything that separates us from our essential nature, namely consciousness itself, at the core of our being. And the ego, I always think of the ego as always carrying a chainsaw on its hip.
Okay.
And whenever the ego has a relationship, the ego takes out the chainsaw and cuts it up into half. And one side, the ego would say, oh, this is pleasant. This is good. Let's reprise it. This is, on the other hand, this is bad. This is unpleasant. Let's avoid it. But we already know that which is pleasant isn't always good for us, and Correct. That which is unpleasant isn't always bad for us. And so, and this goes back to your last comment, which was very, very important. And that is that if we get locked into things that we like, if we only eat food, for example, that we love, and do not eat food that loves us, then that mental inflexibility is going to cause a physical inflexibility. Because when my outer actions conflict with my inner wisdom, there's a contraction in the mind. And that contraction that's in the mind is echoed within the consciousness of every cell. So instead of having a liver that is relaxed, it is contracted. And a contracted liver cannot serve the entire holistic organism to the fullest extent that it has the potential.
Yes, exactly. And from a psychological approach, we talk about whatever you think about, whatever's in your mind determines what you feel. What you feel determines how your body responds. So that's the connection, once again, from your version and my version, which is the same thing, just different words, but it's the same concept. And so that really boils down to when you think of something, what do you think of? You know, we were talking about the Jiminy Cricket. That could be like Jiminy Cricket on one side and like a little devil on the other side. So like in the cartoons, we see that little devil and little angel saying, which one? You know, so your goal is to find that. So going back to the ego, that's what you're basically saying is when it splits it, one is good, one is bad. And in that you walk the fine line and you determine what serves you, what's healthiest for you.
So the ego is the first function of the mind. Second are the senses. You know, we extrude our creative energy. The creative energy that we need to fulfill the purpose of our lives are habitually extruded through our eyes and our nostrils and our mouth and our ears and our hands and our feet to look and smell and taste and hear and touch something outside of ourselves that we hope will bring us happiness and security and health. And we know that it's fairly easy to squeeze toothpaste out of a tube, but have we ever tried to put it back into the tube? It's very difficult once it's been expended.
Yes.
And so the senses, like the ego, only have limited perspectives. They're often wrong, but they're never in doubt.
Sure.
And so they're limited, but sometimes they're correct. Right now, I need a healthy ego to speak to you and to reach your listeners and viewership. I need a healthy ego to drive an automobile. Hey, I have a body, I have senses, life's to be enjoyed. Am I to deny myself sense gratification just because I seek a spiritualized life? No. So the ego, the senses, and the third function of the mind is the unconscious. This is the repository to all of our thoughts and our habits, everything we deem essential to self-preservation. So they only have limited perspectives, but sometimes those limited perspectives are correct. How do we know which is which? Because they're so insistent, aren't they? They're very powerful. That brings us to the fourth function of the mind, which is the conscience, which is very, very interesting and unlike the others. Basically, the conscience operates as a mirror. And it has the capacity alone to reflect wisdom all the way beyond the matrix of this mind-body-sense complex to the center of consciousness, to the super conscious portion of the mind. The same portion of the mind where Albert Einstein saw mathematical equations, same portion of the mind where Paul McCartney hears beautiful melodies. Doesn't mean that you're going to become a physicist, doesn't mean that I'm going to become a songwriter. But what it does mean is if we can access the wisdom reflected, this super conscious wisdom reflected by our conscience, we will know when the ego is correct. We will know when the senses are correct. We will know when the unconscious mind is correct. And we will know what the thought is to think, the word is to speak, and the action is to take that will enable us to fulfill the purpose of our lives without pain, without misery, without bondage. So the key... The key, let me just wrap this together here. The key is to coordinate these four functions, because you see, they're not wrong, but only the conscience has the power to discriminate, determine, judge, and decide. Every single choice that we have ever made and will ever make as human beings is always made by the conscience. But if we do not coordinate the other functions, their loud, pushy voices overwhelms the reflective capacity that the conscience has to access superconscious wisdom. And so in those cases, the ego will just give a rubber stamp to the ego senses and unconscious mind's limited perspective.
Limited perspective.
Sometimes that will work, but it's always a gamble.
Mm-hmm. I love how that made so much sense to me, and I appreciate your wisdom in that. And I'm sure with my listeners and viewers as well, that makes sense, because people talk about many things. We talk about the gut feeling, and that's from a biological approach. That's what we call the enteric brain, which is actually a bunch of nerves that's in your belly, and that actually does something. So that we can talk about that later. But there have been many times people like, I know I shouldn't have dated this person, or I know I shouldn't have made this decision, or I know I shouldn't have done that. And so that, to me, that's what, in a very basic way, that goes back to you're accessing that conscious, or the conscious part of your being, but you're allowing how someone looks, or this or that or this, to influence it. And so when we make that decision, unfortunately, it can turn out to be something unhealthy. I always learned, or I am learning, as I'm always learning, but I'm learning that when you hear that, some people call it the still small voice, or whatever, that's quietude, whatever that is within you, that if you don't find that stillness, you're not going to hear it, or we're going to experience it. And so I find that if I'm given an idea of something, if I don't act on it, in my opinion, there's like a season of grace, or a season of energy that I've been given to do this. And so if I don't do it, then that voice, or that wisdom gets quieter and quieter and quieter. And then pretty soon it's like everything else rides over it. And then I've lost that good stuff.
Not only that, James, but every single relationship, in the constellation of relationships that you have in that moment, if you don't act on that thought, that desire, that emotion in the appropriate way, the entire constellation of relationships that you have at that moment will suffer.
Oh, wow. I really appreciate that, because that makes it that makes it so much more.
Everything is
understanding the matrix of that, using that word, it makes sense to me.
Yes.
Wow. That's brilliant.
So that's a responsibility, because the universe has chosen me to incubate a specific thought leading to a word and an action that will benefit the whole. Nobody else gets this thought. I'm the only one that can do it, you see. Wow.
And that's a specific thought and design that was given only to you, only to me, only to my listeners. It goes back to, you said that's a huge responsibility. And it's to me, it's very sacred in a lot of ways, to realize that, wow, something greater than myself.
So thoughts are our most powerful resource.
Mm-hmm.
And it's important that we coordinate the functions of the mind so that we don't just follow the limited perspective of the ego, senses, and unconscious mind, but rather listen to the conscience and the superconscious wisdom that the conscience has access to, so that we will know how to be of service both to myself and to the world.
That's very powerful. Yeah, that is very powerful. Because when you understand that, that's where compassion, that's where gratitude, that's where all these things line up. Because when you have this responsibility, well, then I want to nurture that. You said incubate, that's a great word, incubate that. And then so that would mean that as I'm aware of this, that I'm not going to get caught up in the nuances and the craziness, the quote craziness of the world around us. Because if I'm really focused on that, then more people do that changes the concept of humanity. That creates, I don't say a movement, but it does create a movement. It changes cultures, it changes minds, it changes how we see each other and the respect that we have. Because if I have been given this gift, you've been given this gift, everybody's given this gift, why would I denigrate that, or why would I minimize that, or do something that would consciously or unconsciously to minimize someone's beauty and gift that they've been given?
So our ability to stay calm, filled with equanimity in the midst of the craziness of life, is one of the major benefits of meditation. It teaches us to be that clock in the midst of a thunderstorm.
Yes, yes. Agreed. I truly agree with that. We only have a couple more minutes here, or 2 more minutes, but I do want to say that when in the show notes, I'm going to put the original interview we had in the show notes. So my listeners, if you hear this on the radio, just go to jamesmillerlifeology.com. If you watch or hear this on any of the podcasting platforms, you should be able to see the website and the information here in the show notes, and then just click on that, and then it'll link you to the show notes here, which you can hear Leonard's original interview with me when he talks about his first book, The Science of Yoga, which is fantastic. I mean, once again, you taught me so much. Unfortunately, our time is up. So if my listeners want to find out more information about you, to purchase this book, one more time, Your Conscience, the key to unlock limitless wisdom and creativity and solve all of life's challenges. Where will they find this information online?
Well, you can get it at the website, which is yourconscience.org, and you can find it at every single fine bookseller nationwide, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, wherever fine books are sold.
Wonderful. Well, Leonard, thank you so much for being a fantastic guest on my show. So you're welcome back anytime. Thank you for teaching me so much wisdom. I know what you've taught me today, I'm definitely going to meditate on that afterwards, because I really believe that's what I needed to hear today. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. God bless you.